in really what is one of the most strict or stringent policies that I've seen. Portugal, the country, has barred companies from contacting employees off hours and requires other protections for remote work. Now, the last 18 months has been a real shift for a lot of workers. Many workers have had to go into a work from home kind of mentality or that arrangement as a function of, the pandemic and different things like that. Companies have also chosen, depending on their business model, to go to a work from home model because it allows them to cut costs, at least from operating leases and things like that. But Portugal, the European country, has actually put in a law that speaks a little bit to what it's trying to do with tourism and digital nomads, but also speaks a little bit to the way they view remote work and an unintended consequence, I think, of this, at least on the employer brand side, is that it's going to force companies to have to rethink what they offer employees. I think it looks like it's just going to make things a little bit more competitive on the employer brand front, but we'll discuss that in a second. Here's some of the details on the actual law that's gone into place. So employers are not allowed to or they're not allowed to contact workers outside of their contracted work hours. And also employers, they have to pay a portion of the electricity and internet bills for these remote workers. And that's a function of a couple of things, probably the main one being that cost of energy and stuff is gone up a lot since the start of the pandemic. Now, that's one of those things that I feel like a lot of employers globally were doing anyway. A lot of the companies that had the balance sheet power to cover the costs of internet and power as they realized employees were working from home have done that. This just forces the employers in Portugal to do this, and I think it's one of those measures that I think some employers could probably see as heavy-handed, but it's nothing that's too unusual for larger companies, at least globally. Now, Portugal relies a lot on digital nomads. I think it must be there must be some tax reason for it. They must be getting some sort of net benefit from either the tourism, if you can call it that. But Portugal is definitely one of the more popular places globally for individuals who can work off a laptop and really aren't tied to anything. They can go and go to Portugal and work. Portugal also has a policy where they give out temporary resident visas quite easily. And so it's a popular place for digital nomads to go and work. The weather's good there too. It doesn't hurt that it's one of those countries with great weather. So you've got that. And some interesting caveats though with the policy is that for remote workers, I assume that are working for companies that have offices in Portugal, remote workers actually have to go into the office, or employers have to mandate that workers come into the office once every 2 months. And the reason that they push this or they mandate this is because they want to fend off things like excessive isolation, which seems counterintuitive when you think about the idea of pushing remote work as a benefit, or pushing remote work as the angle that you want to chase with some of these policies, but also requiring people to go in, because I think there's a realization. This is something that we've talked about a lot on our channel, that there's a lot of different kinds of work that happens in an organization. It's not just, the organizations aren't homogenous in the kinds of work that they do. And so certain roles and certain people respond differently to being in teams and being in the office, and especially younger workers, greener workers, benefit greatly from being in an office and being around great leaders and being around teams and people that are striving to do well with their careers, and to even see people that are further along in their career and say, you know what, I want to be like that individual, and I'm going to do the things that they do to strive for that. If in a remote environment where you're really just staring at a laptop screen all day, or you're on the phone all day by yourself in an office in your house, those things are hard to gauge. And so I think this part where they're mandating that individuals have to go into the office once every 2 months is an acknowledgement that there is a lot of benefit to being around other people. And then finally, with this mandate or this law, younger workers, and I'm not sure how they define younger workers, but young or at least younger parents. Sorry, younger parents are allowed to. They have the right to work from home without preliminary approval from their bosses, as long as they have a child that's under 8 years old. So I get it. I get the catering to the young parent, and there's probably needs of a child when they're that young that are a little bit more spontaneous and things. And then, so that's an interesting policy to put in place. And so you can kind of see that they're building this little ecosystem of rules that really is a benefit to the workers. But as we do with everything that we discuss on this channel, is we look at the flip side, which is how does this affect the employers, and what does this mean from an employer brand standpoint, but also just the economics of running a business, the unit economics of running a business, and what do these mean? And so by forcing employers to cover costs for electricity and internet, for removing at least the visibility, or they're removing something by allowing workers to not have to ask for permission to work from home. I think that there's something there with the dynamic around kind of org charts and chain of command that's interesting. But you're really putting a lot of pressure on the employer to not bend over backwards, but there's a lot of things that an employer has to get used to, which is fine. Over a long enough time horizon, employers will definitely get used to different rules like this. But you can see it's very much favoring the worker here, and you can see how that would be attractive, especially when you think of the digital nomad. But I guess, and then the interesting part, of course, is the employer brand part, where for employers who are maybe operating in Portugal or understand that the kind of worker that they're going to attract is going to be attracted to this kind of a proposal, this raises the bar, I'd say. I spoke about earlier how a lot of companies would maybe use the fact that they could pay part of the electricity bill or part of the internet as a perk or as a benefit of working at an organization. Those working at an organization, those get taken off the table. And so companies need to rethink not the entire value proposition, but certain aspects of their value proposition, and they're gonna have to change things so that you can compete with at least the parts of employer brand that are now mandated or ruled. So interesting rule. I think it's fascinating that a country would put this in place. I think it's probably the only one, I think, for now. But it wouldn't surprise me if at least some of the more socialist leaning countries, I'd go as far to say, I know this at least was put in place by the Socialist Party or a socialist individual there. So it's fascinating. I think the employer brand space and the HR and the talent acquisition space is so exciting at the moment because of all the issues that work from home and the pandemic have brought up. And it's going to be interesting to see how companies respond to this, and just to track it over the next 12, 18 months to see whether this is actually a net benefit for everybody involved. Because I wouldn't go as far as to say it's draconian, but it's extreme in the way it's going about it. So something to look out for definitely over the next year and a half or so.